Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm with Mark Blatty of Byron Blatty Wines. We're here in Los Angeles, and that's where the winery is located, a real Los Angeles winery. So, Mark, welcome, and tell us about Byron Blatty.
Thanks for having me. Byron Blatty is a small production winery, of course, here in LA. Our focus is actually Los Angeles vineyards and LA grown fruit. We do about 800 cases a year right now. The main focus on reds. We do a rosé as well. This vintage, we're doing our first white. All told, we're working with about 14 or 15 different varietals from all over the county and probably somewhere between 20 and 25 lots. So really small production. Our biggest wine is about 100, 110 cases. The smallest run we've done on a single wine is 11. So small lot winemaking here in LA.
So you're sourcing fruit from all these different vineyards. Tell me, when people think about Los Angeles, they don't necessarily think of vineyards, or maybe they know about Malibu, but where are all these vineyards located? That's
a great question. LA County's huge. So, there's the old joke, right, that if you live in LA, you can go skiing and go surfing on the same day. And that's true. With such a big county, we've got a really diverse microclimates all over. So we get a mixture of fruit from various places. We do get a little fruit from Malibu, from a vineyard we manage, the Malibu Coast AVA. We're working with a vineyard in Bel Air for the first time this year, which doesn't have an AVA. It's just in Bel Air. We're working with a little Sangiovese from Bel Air. We work with a vineyard in the Agua Dulce area, which is north of Santa Clarita in the Sierra Pelona Mountains. So northeast LA County, and the Antelope Valley, which is effectively the California high desert, but a little sliver of it still in LA. And I think one of the things that people get a little thrown about when we tell them where the vineyards are is they go, high desert, Malibu. What's the common thread? And the answer is they're very, very different climates, but they have one thing in common, which is it gets cold at night. Coastal influence, obviously, in Malibu, and the elevation from the high desert is the high desert. So we're talking vineyards 3,000 feet plus. So.
Wow. So you said that you're doing all small production. What's your total case production, and where can people find your wines?
Sure. Our total case production right now is about 800 cases. It varies a bit year on year, but we're around 800 cases. We have a wine club. We do a lot of direct consumer sales through our wine club, through our website. But here in LA, we're in a lot of the high-end wine shops all over town, high-end restaurants, kind of scattered all over town. We do a little bit of wine also into Illinois every year. We've got some club members out there. We ship into New York, Florida, and a few other states, but mainly LA area.
Wow. So you're an LA boy, born and raised. What's your first memory relevant to wine?
Oh, first memory relevant to wine. That's a good one. I think it probably comes from my mom's family. My dad was born in LA, but my mom's family, and my mom's from New York, and they have some Italian background. So in her family, food, wine, always sort of wine a big part of just family get-togethers, holidays. Everybody gets together. It's sort of like that. Food is the all-day thing. Dinner starts at noon and ends at 8. Food, wine. So that's probably the earliest wine. It was like drinking Chianti out of like the woven yes. bottles. Where then the leftover gets the melted candle wax and all that. That's probably my first wine exposure. Yeah.
So when you moved a little bit past that, do you have a memory of one of the most influential or memorable wines you ever drank, and what the occasion was?
Yeah. I think actually the first time that I really could understand and what terroir meant, and that the difference, it was Napa Valley. So my wife Janie and I, we were in Napa. It was actually our first trip to Napa. We were sort of Cabernet Sauvignon crazy, and we were doing, 5 tastings a day, 5 tasting appointments. pretty much blotto on the streets of Yountville, falling down by the end of the first night. Which is not how we do Napa anymore, but we were drinking cab, and we were drinking cab after cab after cab after cab. And in a lot of these different tasting appointments that we were in, they were mainly pouring cabs from the Valley floor. But every so often, there was one cab in the lineup that stood out to me. And as we went through the trip, we realized those were cabs from Howell Mountain, which is obviously one of the Napa AVAs. It's the high elevation mountain. Is very distinct. And I think that's when it clicked for me, just the level of nuance and detail, that they were all growing the same grape from relatively the same region. But this one region, no matter who was pouring it, by the way, or who made it, was standing out. And that's sort of one of the first memorable, for me, like, tastes of wine. I know it's multiple tastes, but when it kind of like,
it meant something to you.
Yeah.
Click.
Yeah. And I felt like I understood it at that point a bit.
So where have you traveled around the world to explore wine?
We spend a lot of time in California, of course, up and down, Northern California, Central Coast, obviously Santa Barbara right here. We spent some time a few years back in France and also in Italy. We were there not specifically for wine, but made it a point to obviously partake and experience local wines, right? Everywhere we went, which was sort of interesting too, for me, more than anything, realizing how hyper local those markets are, which is interesting because living in LA, you see wines everywhere you go. There's wines from everywhere else. And when you're in a small town in Italy, all the wines are from that region. And there's maybe a shelf or two of other wines that are usually for tourists. But I don't know, that was something that sort of just sticks out as something different. Yeah.
So when you think about all the populations of the world and where you've been, who do you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
Oof, that's tough. I mean, I think French and Italians on a value proposition, I think probably get the best of it. I mean, they're just sort of super inexpensive table wine, blows the doors off anything that's being made. I would say, spend €7 in France in a little town or $7 here in the supermarket. I think the French and the Italians get the best of that proposition.
And if we were to come over to your home and walk into your room, whether it's in your refrigerator or a wine refrigerator or in the garage, wherever you store special wines, what would we find in your cellar?
Okay, well, apart from the Byron Blatty, which it takes up a lot of space, we do try actually not to drink too much of our own wine because we drink so much of it through the course of just, running the winery. We try and stay diverse to stop from getting that sort of house palate, as it were. French whites, Italian whites, Spanish whites. We drink a lot of white wine at the house. As far as some of our cellared wines, lay down wines, we keep a running vertical of some California classics. Like we've got a little vertical going of Opus One. We've got a couple of the big Colt cabs, not the crazy ones. Well, I don't know. We keep a little Scarecrow, a couple of the Howell Mountain wines, and a couple of other big, we like Continuum, which is Napa Valley Bordeaux blend. Paso, we keep a little wine from Paso around. A pretty good snapshot. I mean, we're fans of California wine. I think we drink a lot of California red. When it comes to whites and rosés, we tend to skew a little more old world.
So, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Oh, a perfect variety. Oof. Yes. Yes, I do. I think it's Cabernet Sauvignon. I know that's boring for most people these days, where, I feel like a lot of people or like me, you start in wine, and then you get into reds, you're Cab Sauv, and then you love Cab, right? And then you realize there's a whole huge world that's not Cabernet Sauvignon. And you go out and you start experiencing all types of different wines, and you kind of move on from Cab, which we did. But I feel like I've been finding my way back to it. But it's for a very specific reason. We started Byron Blatty in 2014. And at the time, our goal was to make a super high-end Bordeaux, Cab Sauv based wine. That was the goal.
From Los Angeles? From
Los Angeles, exactly. Then we started to realize, wow, Cab is hard to come by in LA. And also there's a lot of it out there that's just not, it's not that it's bad. It's just not, a lot of it's not very cabby. It's not very cab-like. It's sort of, I think it's a little, in a lot of places, a little too hot for it. So we sort of transitioned. We still work with a lot of Bordelais varietals, but we started making Rhone blends, working with Grenache, Tempranillo, a lot of the other varietals that do really well in the heat. And our fundamental approach to our winemaking is we ferment and age all our wines in individual lots, and then we look to blend later. Obviously, we have blends in mind, but our approach to blending is you start with a single varietal, and if it can be improved upon by blending, made more complex, whatever, you blend. And if you look at all the top wines from all over the world, they're blends, right? Most people think, oh, they're single varietal, they're mainly blends. Because you can add so much complexity, you can add layers of nuance and depth and all these things. Well, we semi-recently, 2017, we started working with some Cab out of the Malibu Coast AVA, and we have found that wine, although we did blend 2% of Petit Verdot into it as a standalone varietal, it's got layers, it's got the complexity, it's got the depth, it's got all these things that you would expect to only get by blending. Mm-hmm. And this wine's got it without blending, which to me sort of brings our journey full circle. You know, we started with Cab, was the goal. Right. We moved away from it, and then we've come back to it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I know there's people that are super Pinot crazy. I enjoy Pinot very, very much. I'd love to work with some Pinot. I don't know that Pinot and I have that relationship just yet.
Well, you know, to each their own for wine varieties.
Right.
Speaking of to each their own, what's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
Oh, you know, there's a lot of people who have really strong feelings about it. It's a controversial subject.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I think that, you know, wine critics and scores, if you don't know anything about wine, it gives the consumer reassurance that wine's one of those, I think, rare commodities where most of the time people are purchasing a product they've never experienced before, don't know anything about. And a critic and a score, it gives the consumer comfort that they can make a purchase and not be afraid. So I think in that respect, it's a good thing. We submit our wines for reviews. I think where it gets problematic is that, you know, you're getting one person's opinion. And obviously you don't know if that person likes the same things that you do. So, you know, you can't obviously judge a wine purely by the score. But for us, for example, being a newer winery from an untested, really unproven region in Los Angeles, we wanted to submit our wines for scores so we could see where do we stack up with other regions. And also at times it's helpful for us too with our customers or potential customers that they're thinking, I don't know, wine from LA. And then they go, oh, 94 points.
Yeah, it gives you a little credibility.
Yeah. So I'm a fan of it. I mean, I also think you have to look at it from a certain perspective. To us, for example, if Robert Parker's giving a wine 100 points, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best wine in the world. What it means to me is that Robert Parker's saying for a cab or whatever it is, this wine cannot be improved upon. Doesn't mean I'm going to like it, but so I look at it in that perspective. So I'm actually a fan.
Okay. Rapid fire.
Okay.
Red, white, or rosé?
Red.
Still or sparkling?
Still.
Super easy.
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
So, you drink a lot of red wine, clearly.
Yeah.
How do you approach food and wine pairing? How do you feel there are rules to follow, or is it sort of come what may, especially when it comes to red wines and, it's summertime?
Sure. I actually, if people want to drink, Malbec with sand dabs or lobster, cool. I wouldn't advise it. I think I'm a bit more of a traditionalist. I don't really do red wine with fish. Sure, lighter reds can be, depending on how it's prepared. But I think that food and wine pairing, here's the thing, right? The rule of thumb, well, let's just put it this way. When food and wine pairing goes badly, the wine is what suffers. Your short rib's still going to taste like short rib, So I am always trying to be very careful that we're going to pair something up appropriately so our wine doesn't taste like shit.
Okay, fair enough. And on those occasions where you're drinking a little too much wine, or anything else for that matter,
sure,
got any special cures for a hangover?
Oh, I mean, the usual, right? Handful of Advil and a glass of water before bed. The hot or cold shower in the morning. And then, of course, a little wine early in the day never hurts.
So for someone who's never tasted your wine, what do you think that they're missing out on?
What are they missing out on if they've never tasted our wine?
What are you trying? What would you hope that your wine conveys to someone?
Well, I think our wines for LA, well, in particular, not just for LA wines, but wines in general, they're a pretty nice mix of elegance, I think, and power. Power, obviously, coming from our warm climate and the sunshine. But all of our wines are really distinct from each other. I think if you taste through the lineup of our wines, you could kind of taste each one and think, yeah, okay, this tastes like a Byron Blatty wine. The styles are all in a similar vein, but each wine is really unique from each other. They show a lot of character. Some of it's, varietal driven, terroir driven. I think mainly, though, I would say you're missing out on seeing how good Los Angeles wine can be. I think is what I would have to sum it up as.
And so when the space aliens arrive, and you're going to present them with a wine, what are you going to show them that's going to turn them on to LA wine? Which of your wines?
Right now, it's our 2017 Tremor. It's
aproposly named because we live in earthquake land.
Yeah, exactly. It's so the Tremor is, I think, it sums up a lot of what we're doing down here. It's based on a classic, GSM, but there's a little tweak. And you'll find with a lot of our wines that there's a little tweak, something a little different. And that, of course, in the Tremor, the GSM, instead of Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, the M is Merlot, which, by the way, didn't end up in the blend because we're trying to be different. We let taste guide us. And our assistant winemaker one day splashed Grenache and Merlot together, and we were onto something. So it sort of personifies, some of the different things that we do in that blend. It's also a blend of 3 varietals, yes, but also from 3 different vineyards, which is a lot of what we're trying to do is, I know we're in a day and age where a lot of people are very focused on vineyard-specific wines and certain sites, which is fantastic, and that has, of course, its merits in place. For us, we're finding that we can create, we think, more complex wines with more character and depth by blending multiple vineyards, injecting each one's personality into the wines. So this wine sort of gives that snapshot of sort of all of our ideals, if you will, different styles of blends, working with different vineyards. And then it's a nice balanced wine that I think balances that sort of elegance that you look for in a red wine, but also it's not shy on the fruit.
Yeah. Well, I'm enjoying sipping it right now, so it's quite tasty. So you've been making wine for a short period of time now, since 2014, you said. Have you established any rituals that you do at the beginning of harvest?
I don't think we have any real rituals. It's just as we get into each year, no rituals. I think we just kind of go for it. Yeah.
No opening a bottle of champagne or not shaving the beard for 6 months or
No, we don't have superstitions about it. We don't kind of gear up for it that way. I think the cool thing is anyone will tell you when you're making wine, going into each harvest though is always that promise of something new, another vintage. I mean, I think we're really excited about what's going on. Maybe not overall in the world with climate change, but what's been happening here in Southern California lately is the last few vintages, we've come out of our extreme drought conditions, which has immensely improved, I think, the quality of our fruit. So we've just been excited. 17 was the first non-drought vintage. Fruit took a big step up. Last year continued that trend. I think everything's still on par with 17. This year, everything skewed a little bit later because of this mild spring that we've had. So right now, everybody's just waiting for the other shoe to drop. But yeah, no rituals, but I think we just go into each harvest season with really, that excitement.
So you said that you're managing the vineyard in Malibu. Yeah. Are you managing all the other vineyards you're sourcing fruit from?
No, the other vineyards, all of the vineyards, first off, are family owned. And most of them are farmed by the owners themselves. Sometimes they have, their help and whatever. Most of those vineyards, no, we have contracts with the growers. We're on the same page about how they're farming and what they're doing. And we're always, that's a give and take, and we're always working with them closely on that. But they actively manage. They also have 15 plus years in those vineyards. They know how to deal with, some of the conditions that we might not be able to quite understand, the extreme heat and some of the unique issues that they face every year. The vineyard in Malibu, though, it's not in Malibu proper, but it's in the Malibu Coast AVA. Mm-hmm. So it's actually on the warmer side of the Santa Monica Mountains. It's sort of in a little area called Lobo Canyon. And that vineyard is really special. We do actively manage it. In fact, we're going to be there today doing a little canopy management. And we have a vineyard manager who does the day-to-day. But it's about a 1,200 vine vineyard. It's a super steep hill. Where actually under the new regulations, I don't think it would be allowed to be planted, but it was planted in the late 90s. So that's our baby right now as far as vineyards go.
And when you're walking through that vineyard, do you ever talk to the vines?
Usually I'd be talking to myself more than the vines about whatever, thing it is that I've realized I'm having to do, weeds or extra shoot growths. But no, we don't quite have that much of a spiritual approach to winemaking. Yeah.
So when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, it changed so many times. I think when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a ball player, baseball. And then I think I had a stint where I wanted to be a cop. And then winemaking was never what I wanted to do. Wine drinking, yes. Winemaking, no. I actually went to school for auto mechanics, in the Bay Area. And I did that for 3 years. And my whole goal at the time was to, open up a custom auto body shop and restore classic cars. And then I got a job after getting out of school I moved back to LA. I got a job at a custom auto body shop. And on my first day, I was there for about 3 hours, and I was in the middle of like stripping the paint off a hood of some car. And it just jumped in my head. I just said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And I just packed up my stuff. And I didn't say a word to anybody. I just left. And I didn't know what I was going to do. But I just knew, I think the thing was I had really enjoyed, all the car restoration, all that as a hobby. And then the minute it became a job, it wasn't working for me anymore. Right. Literally, like the minute it happened. So then I moved on, and I ended up spending 16 years in television just happened into it. So.
And so how did you decide you wanted to make wine?
So, starts, of course, with the love of wine, drinking wine, learning about wine, becoming more and more obsessed with it, as one tends to, the more, as if you get the wine bug. And then Jenny and I, we were going on trips to wine country, Napa, wherever, across California. And we actually originally started to have these kind of daydreams about, well, would we leave LA, move to wine country? Could we have a house, small hillside at our house here in LA. Maybe we could plant vines on our hill and make our own wine. And it just sort of all seemed super either far-fetched, or I could envision, like a half-planted vineyard that I wasn't really taking care of, or what are we going to do? Make wine in our garage? Like it sort of never, but that's before I discovered the alternating proprietorship, which of course is how we do wine today, or how we make our wine. I always thought that you had to have, in order to own a winery, I thought you had to have the old stone building and the driveway and the vineyard and the dog and the whole thing. But of course, most wine's not made that way. I didn't realize this. Jenny and I were on a tour, a tasting or whatever, in Napa. We were going through one of the barrel rooms at a winery, and I spotted a barrel of wine from another winery that we liked, from Howell Mountain. And I stopped the tour guide and I said, "Excuse me, do you guys own that winery?" And he looked at the barrel and he said, "Oh no, they just make their wine here." And I was like, "Wait, excuse me, question." Yes. I was like, "What do you mean they make their wine here?" And he explained to me, of course, that, well, they just buy fruit from vineyards around Napa, and their winemaker actually makes the wine for this winery, and that's how they have their wine label. And that was like mind explosion. Wait a minute. So just to round things out, Jenny and I both worked in television for years on the production side mainly. And so we just took a step back and said, okay, hold on, let's be the executive producers of our wine. And that sort of made it a more conquerable, more tangible, achievable thing to break it up into pieces and approach it from that way. Get the right team together, find the right talent, find the right fruit, and we went from there.
But you're the primary winemaker.
What's that? No, well, we have a team.
Oh, you have a team.
Yeah. We have a team. Steve Lemley, Nate Hasper, they're the day-to-day winemakers. But, we have all the relationships with all the growers. We call for all the picks. We work with them. We do all the blends. We're responsible for the whole barrel program. But those guys, they went to UC Davis. Those are the guys you want in the winery when like fermentation gets stuck, and of course they bring years of winemaking experience to the table, but they sort of, we kind of all got on the same page about the vision.
Right. So if you were planning a really romantic evening with your wife, I know you have little children or a little child at home, so I don't know if that happens very often, but what wine would you be pulling out to make that evening romantic?
One of ours or one of...
I don't know. What you tell me?
Well, I would say neither of us are huge on bubbly, but always nice to start like the evening with a glass. Mm-hmm. I always think that's always, if you're going to go with a romantic evening, you start with a glass of bubbly. That sort of sets the tone. Then I think we would probably go with a French white. Mm-hmm.
From what region?
Probably Burgundy.
Uh-huh.
Light, crispy, minerally, maybe a Chablis, something like that. And then for Jenny and I, we would probably have to go with one of our wines, our proprietary blend for the main, or something. If not one of ours, something big and red.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what would be the best piece, if you can recall, the best piece of advice you received? Or one of the best pieces of advice.
I'll tell you one of the best, actually, is a funny one, is Scott Rich, who is the winemaker for Moraga in LA and Bel Air, and also has his own label in Glen Ellen Talisman. He makes single vineyard Pinots up there. He said one of the best pieces of advice he could give us, because we spoke to him before we started, is to use the soft pour little things for when you're pouring at tastings. He said, because when you're small and you don't have the soft pours and you first start, you're pouring out so much wine. And if somebody wants you pour them a small taste, and if they want more, they'll ask. And it is funny because when he told us that, we had already done some events where we just ripped through wine. And when you put out a wine that's like 50 cases and you inadvertently pour someone like a glass and then you just watch them dump it out, it's funny.
Hurts.
Yeah, it was funny. And you realize like, oh wow, that actually, you save a lot of wine that way. So that was one of the best. I think, to be truthful though, so many people gave people gave us a lot of advice, and it was all welcomed. But I think sometimes you also just have to learn all the lessons on your own, and people give you advice and it's not like you ignore it, but sometimes you think, well, that's going to be different for me, or I'm going to do it my own way. And some people were right about things. Some people we have different experiences from. But speaking of that, it's actually, I find the winery community is actually incredibly gracious with one another. Like people are always helping each other. You can call people for advice anytime, like it seems like other wineries or winemakers are always willing to lend a hand, which is a pretty cool part of the business, I think.
Looking back, what would you say is your proudest achievement to date in your work?
Oh, well, it's hard to say, because I think for us, we're at such an early stage in our journey. I mean, we started with the wine in 2014, but we didn't release any wines until the fall of 17. So we haven't even been in the market for 2 years. But I think that collectively, or as a whole, I think we've grabbed the attention of other people in the wine industry, the buyers, critics, and consumers that are starting to take notice of Los Angeles wine. And I think two sort of things that in that sort of overall picture that stand out is actually the previous vintage of Tremor that we were drinking. The 2016 was actually the first wine that we sent out for critical review. And we got 91 from Wine Enthusiast, and we got 90 points from Robert Parker's Wine Advocate, which, okay, 90, 91, great. I know a lot of people...
Yeah, that's very good from right out of the gate.
Well, thank you. And I know in the going back to our conversation about points, I think some people get a little numb about the points thing, and they're like, oh, 90, whatever. I want 97, Okay. The context of the Parker score has, I think, really sunk in with us over time, which is when Tremor got the 90, it made us and one other winery the only two to get 90 or more from an LA wine from Parker in over a decade. So
that's a pretty good achievement.
I felt like it, right? On the first vintage of that wine. We'll
revisit you in 10 years and see what you say your proudest moment is, but I think that's a pretty good one for now.
Thank you very much.
So complete the sentence for me.
Okay.
A table without wine is like?
A boring place to be.
Okay. If there was one person in this world that you wish could taste your wine, living or deceased, famous or not famous, who might you want that to be?
Oh, my grandmother. Yeah, my grandmother Peg Blatty. Although she was more of a vodka woman herself, I think she would have been really, really proud of it. Yeah.
Especially because the wine has her name in it.
Yeah, exactly. She passed away, I think it was maybe 2013 or right when we started. Mm. Yeah, I don't think she was even really aware of it. So I would have loved for Peg to have had some wine.
Oh. So I appreciate you being here today, and we're almost done. There's one more thing we do. Based on a couple of the wines you were talking about today, some of your wines and some others, I want you to tell me what music it makes you think of, what you'd want to be listening to while you drink it. So,
okay,
let's start with a Howell Mountain Cabernet, since you're such a fan of those.
Howell Mountain Cab, I think I feel like the Black Keys.
Okay. And that lovely Chablis, that lean, crisp white wine you would start your romantic evening with?
The Chablis, I think, might have to go with I think of like a bistro-y kind of music, like a Pearl Django or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Hot Club of San Francisco, something like that. And
then you said you have a proprietary blend.
Yeah.
Describe that wine and what you would pair with it.
Okay, well it's 98% Cab.
Oh, and 2%.
2% Petit Verdot. It did 20 months in the barrel. The barrel. There was only one barrel. 20. So one single barrel wine. It was 100% new French oak barrel. It's inky. It's got all kinds of dark fruit. Got coffee on the nose. It's like a rich, weighty Cab. Music, I don't, something heavy, like, I don't really listen to it anymore, but for some reason right now, like Helmet is coming to mind, like something driving, you do a little Motorhead, something. I think it's a pretty hardcore wine. So.
Okay. And to finish, the 2017 Tremor, which we are sipping in our glasses right now.
Right now it's coming to mind. I don't know. I don't know if this describes the wine or not, but I'm thinking of like, Tijuana Taxi by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass.
Okay.
Yeah.
I dig that. I can do that.
You know that, Jim?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we go, can you remind people where they can find you and your wines?
Sure. Well, we're in LA. We're floating around. We're sort of nomadic. We do a lot of pop-ups and events and things like that. So really, I think the best way to find us is on our website, byronblatty.com. Or on social media, Byron Blatty Wines on Facebook or Instagram. That'll get you updated on what we're doing. Jump on our mailing list. We're always around town, pouring somewhere, popping up in new restaurants, etc.
Fantastic. Well, we will look for you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.